What's that? Who there? Whoa.
All right, guys, I've got Robbie Bent, the co-founder and CEO of Inward. Robbie, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm so pumped for this one. I've been looking forward to it for a while. So you've got a super diverse background that, like I was saying before, overlaps a bunch of my biggest interests. And so it's going to be really fun to chop it up and dive into some of those. But first, as we were talking about, you actually just got home from a 10-day dark retreat. And so, before we get into anything that you've done, I would love for you to just talk about, what's the approach to do something like that? What was it, itself, and what are the benefits that you took away?
Yeah, so big question. We could probably spend the entire show chatting about this, but I just noticed some bad habits building up during COVID, right? And so if you're listening and these resonate with you, the first was a lack of boundaries. And so all our work transitioned to remote, which means you can now do 8 meetings a day and you can schedule them back to back. And it's very easy for the other person on the other side to schedule also. So your normal boundaries of commute, social time, eating are gone. Second was gyms were closed. And so I've exercised pretty frequently almost my entire life. And so for the first time, there was a piece of friction to get to a gym, especially in Toronto. Lockdowns have been pretty intense. I think the most intense in North America. So those two things were an issue. And then I also started a second business. We pivoted during COVID and tried to come up with an online offering. So we now had physical space, online offering, and double the workload. And so no boundaries, no physical activity, double the workload. And then another really interesting thing started happening. That two interesting things that, if you're listening, you'll probably resonate with. One is if you're not hanging out with people in real life, you're filling that time hanging out with people on the internet. And internet time moves at 5x the pace of physical time. So if we're sitting talking back and forth, I'm engaged, I'm listening. If I'm in a Slack channel, I can be in 5 channels at once. And so the stimulation for your brain is completely different. So that was one thing that was happening. And then finally, because we're opening a physical business, I got obsessed with COVID and what's actually happening here? Are we going to be able to open? What's the government going to say? What's the vaccination stuff? What are the cases? And so I for the first time in 5 years, had a bad Twitter addiction. And so it was on there checking. And then, I started checking crypto prices after COVID and just kind of got in this rabbit hole of using Twitter a lot. And I found that was bringing up a lot of comparison feelings. And then also, I did a lot of research on this thing called dopamine fasting. And it's just an idea of gaining back your impulse control. And we can talk about problems with addiction, which I struggled with before. And so I could really feel it's this desire for stimulation. And the more stimulation you get through quick reward patterns, whether it's shopping or gambling or emotional eating or excessive internet usage. It's a quick reward pattern that gives you a dopamine hit. And the more of that you get, the dopamine and receptors and reward pathways in the brain change. And they actually make it much more difficult to find joy in boredom in your regular life. And so if you're listening and you're every 5 minutes, I'm picking up my phone when I'm by myself to check my email, or I'm checking Slack, or I'm watching a movie and I'm also reaching to check Twitter. And this is not something human beings had to deal with 20 years ago unless you were actually a drug addict. And so now, because of how pervasive technology is and how well it's built and the stimulation it gives you, creates a lot of potential for unhappiness if not managed properly. And so all this was sitting with me and I just wasn't feeling good, and I've done Vipassana retreats, psychedelics, I have a meditation practice, I've got an ice bath and sauna in my backyard. And even with all those things, I'm feeling shitty. I'm not feeling good about myself. I'm feeling tired, run down, just burnt out. I'm feeling like adding one more task to the stack is overwhelming. Partly to my own design, but that kind of stuff because of COVID was coming up. And so I really just wanted a break or a change. And I've done stuff like this before, as I mentioned. And so the goal was to go and have a complete reset of those rewards pathways. Now, I booked this a year just into COVID in the summertime. And I think I used the upcoming dark retreat as an excuse to go even harder. And then like even it be more unhealthy than normal because I had like, hey, I'm 4 months away, I can just make it. And then like 10 days, so that was the emphasis. The other one is when you put yourself as a human being through resilience, challenges, restriction. Like these are very common practices dating back to the beginning of time in almost all religions. So in Judaism, they have Shabbat, which is a day off technology. And in many religious practices, they have fasting, meditation, prayer, times when you go inward, you're on your own. And so anytime I've done one of these type of challenges, these resilience challenges, I found such leverage in sitting with your own discomfort. And then as a result, taking that into your daily life. And so that's sort of the reasoning behind it. We can kind of stop there and take it which way you want to go.
Yeah. I mean, it resonates so much with me. I think for me, I've gone down those Twitter black holes as well. And it's gotten to the point where my hand subconsciously reaches for my pocket without me even, acknowledging it, which is crazy. And so I think there's a lot of people listening that are, I would feel like you and I are in the same camp, high performers. You've got big goals. You're trying to grind, make every use of every minute you have. But on the flip side, you don't feel great, and there's something sitting with you, and it's you've gone to the doctor perhaps, and it's not like a medical condition. It's all inside. And so I think like the self-awareness to know that it's a problem is the first step. So I've definitely acknowledged that. But I think for a lot of people, they haven't, dialed into these retreats, which can be transformative. And so I'd love you to even take it a step further. Like, so you said you went to a cave and you basically lived in a cave for 8 days. What was that like? And how much of a reset did you get on those kind of dopamine triggers?
So first thing I would just say, like, this isn't the first step. And so if this is bothering you, I wouldn't be like, hey, you need to go and like live in a complete darkness for 8 days. I'm also super into psychedelic medicines and I've been sober for 5.5 years, primarily through working with a coach using psychedelic medicines and going to Vipassana retreats. So I'm pretty comfortable sitting in these very challenging spaces. I'd heard about this, and it was partly for the reset, but partly just interested as like what's going to happen. And then partly like, for people who are listening that are high performers, there's often, can I do this? Am I strong enough? Can I face the challenge? And that was really interesting to me. The first time I heard about it, was somebody in our community, and he pitched it as a psychedelic experience, and that's how he'd heard about it. And so I wasn't that interested. Then I heard a podcast with Aubrey Marcus and one with Kyle Cease, and I reached out to the person who runs the dark retreat. It's called Sky Cave, and we can throw it in the show notes. And this guy was incredible. His name's Scott Berman, and he'd done 20 plus Vipassana retreats. He'd spent a year in silence, and the way he pitched it to me was phenomenal. It was really about finding a new level of awareness and in relaxation, and just in the darkness with no sensation coming in, you lose track of your identity to a degree, and you can play with relaxing. And so specifically with this, so first to close off on that point, this isn't, where you need to start. And I'll talk a bit about the darkness and what happened there in more detail. But I would say if you're listening, you're like, hey, I'm struggling. A lot of times a vacation isn't what's needed. It's reduction from stimulation. And so it doesn't have to be through one of these hardcore retreats. Just go out without your phone for 2 days in nature. Bring a book if you want. Go with a partner and try and turn off the phone. And so there's some pretty interesting writings from psychologist Cameron Seppa, who runs a company called B Maximus, testosterone replacement therapy. Really cool guy, super high performer. And he's wrote about what he calls dopamine fasting. And the idea is having 2 to 3 hours a night to shut down. So like your computer is closed at X time and you're no longer thinking about work. And, 1 day a week, you're taking time off completely, 1 weekend a quarter and 1 week a year. And for everybody, no matter how hard you're working, and I've worked with people who are insane, like 18 hours a day, very ambitious, very smart. And at the end of the day, everybody breaks at that pace. And so you may think, hey, I don't have time for that, but this will help you in the end. One of the interesting things that happened in the dark retreat, after about 5-6 days, if you're feeling overwhelmed, every day it feels like I'm getting rained on and I'm just trying to dodge. It's dripping and I'm trying to dodge the drops, right? And I can't, and they're changing each day. And so it just seems overwhelming because my task list is always changing and it feels like I don't have time to think. And so after 5 days, everything I need to do, all the task lists, like I'm very type A, like I wake up and I'm like, okay, I gotta do these 10 tasks, like let's go, like checking them off, getting, pumped up about it. And in the dark retreat, that stops. Everything stops. It's like you've put up an umbrella. And in that umbrella, you have space. And all of a sudden, creative ideas, things just start meshing, things start tying together. Like, wow, that's a great idea. And if you never have space for like boredom, loneliness, thinking, it's very hard to make those connections and go one layer deeper. And so if you're listening and you're like really good at like, yeah, man, I'm crushing tasks, I'm getting through emails, I'm at inbox zero, like that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the right things, right? Because you're just reacting, and anyone can put an email in your inbox, and that means you then need to respond to it. Like, how do you create time to think about, well, what's our long-term strategy, or what's a creative marketing idea, or what's something I should be writing about? So there's just giving yourself space, in my mind, is one of the learnings I've had that always seems to pay dividends.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. I feel like task switching is kind of a poison, right? Like the more frequently you task switch and reset and introduce new stimulus, react, finish, new stimulus, react, like that loop is just a poison to creativity and new ideas. And so man, we could talk about that for hours. The dark retreat sounds amazing. I want to get into your background, and it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just doing some research, you've kind of had like a tale of two lives per se. So you had like this first act, I'll say, this first like wave where you started a couple companies, Romely and Envy Energy or INVI Energy, and you said you've had problems with addiction, you were grinding on the startups, and then I was listening to a podcast you were on. You basically went on your first Vipassana. You discovered psychedelic medicine, meditation, and everything changed after that. And so, I would love to. Maybe we'll take it in two acts in this episode, and maybe let's focus on the startup piece first, because a lot of people listening are probably in that first wave themselves. And so, it'll be interesting to hear. Maybe just start with like, how would you get into starting those two startups? Like, why were those spaces attractive to you? And we can go from there.
Yeah, totally. And so I started my career in finance, where I went to school. I graduated high school in 2006, and it was very much engineering. Software engineering wasn't a thing. That like none of these startups existed, so it wasn't like it wasn't even a thing that I knew you could do. Especially where I went to school, and I was like, oh, well, I want to be in business. My dad's in business, and then I got to business school, and it was like, well, what do the smartest kids do? Like, that's what I want to do. And so it was investment banking. And so I did that for 2 years, and I worked at a hedge fund, and I hated it. Never really thought in my mind, like, what do I want to do? What kind of problems do I want to solve? I wanted to make money, and I wanted to be successful. I wanted to feel successful. I wanted people to think I was successful for external validation, which is just like a battle of mine that I've been going through for many years, the same as many people. And so I did that, hated it. During the credit crisis in 2008, when Lehman Brothers failed, was kind of like, what am I doing? And so it was like, oh, you know what? Well, like startups are kind of starting to be a thing. I think I can make money doing this. And the first phase of my startup career was generated around making money. I was like, okay, we can solve a big problem and make a lot of money. And so I partnered with a technical co-founder in Toronto, and our idea was to build this global telecom platform with roaming as a wedge. And so we built a prototype of a SIM card that, based on where you traveled to, could provision you with a new identity. And so we ended up building, the hardware itself, the software on the SIM card, the telecommunications platform, the billing platform. Huge learning there. The idea was like, okay, if we build this really cool thing, people will come. And we had prototypes that worked well enough that when it was sort of this idea that on the back end, we're making them work, but they're not like fully perfect. And so you see this a lot with startups, where you might it's some kind of like delivery service, and on the back end, the startup's making it look perfect, when in reality, it's not automated. It's, a bunch of people working super hard. Yeah. And it's just to determine demand. And so there was a term for it that's slipping my mind. But it's just like magic, like, hey, I bought this thing and it happens, and they're not making any money off it, but it makes it looks like it works, and you can determine that there's demand, and indicates like, hey, we should build something here. And so that's kind of what we did. And we had the system that, we would give to super high net worth people, and they'd be in Toronto and they'd travel to England and they'd make a call, and it would say like, hey, you just paid $30 for this call, you saved $500. And they'd be like, holy wow.
Yeah, it's
and
magic.
That's how we generated. Yeah, it's magic, right? And it's like, everyone's going to use this for traveling. And so that's how we raised our first capital, was a bunch of high net worth investors. We used that to build a better system. But I knew, I was in Toronto, I was by myself. I didn't know anything about like lean startup, about like MVP. So in my head, oh, well, okay, it has to work in every phone. It has to work in every country. What if someone's going here? Like, all these big distributors were coming saying, yeah, this is really cool. We want to work with you. And, as a startup partnering with big players, there's a lot of risk there. So, we were all excited about a deal with Best Buy. And then it turns out the product wasn't good enough. Like 2 people out of 10 couldn't install it. And so Best Buy doesn't, if they're getting returns, they don't want to carry the product. And so I had this huge idea to target like, what is basically Google Fi now, and was very early and had built the software that would have worked, but the execution was poor. Like, we could have built for a single phone, the iPhone 4, for a Toronto business traveler going to the UK, and done one carrier deal, used a carrier billing system, and just focused on the software. Instead, by building the entire thing up front, we ended up spending about $25 million over 4 years, which put us in a really tough position. It made it like, we have to grow super large to make a return on this investment. And we just couldn't grow that fast. And at the same time, roaming prices declined super aggressively. So another lesson is, when you're selling a product at a discount, you can't compete with someone who's selling that as a loss leader. So Rogers, it's a big Canadian company, would just say like, if we were competing for a deal, they would just be like, oh, well, we'll give you the roaming for free, and we'll make it up on the corporate billing. And so,
yeah, and you guys were dead immediately.
Exactly. So it was really tough with corporate. It was really tough with retail, because the pricing has declined. So people didn't want to like switch their SIM card, get their phone unlocked. It just wasn't a big enough value add. It was when we were like 90% discount in like year 1, 2. And I was like, this is going to be hugely successful. And then the roaming prices declined so quickly. And that was like really challenging for me. We'd built this huge team. Another lesson, we'd hired some pretty senior people from telecom, and my thoughts were, I'm 24, I don't know how to do this. Like, I need gray hair to help me. And, you're hiring a senior person from an industry. You can't take somebody with 5,000 employees and put them in a 10-person environment. All of a sudden the budget explodes. There's like first-class travel. We're trying to do telecom deals, and there's not visibility into what everybody was doing. And so that was part of the reason why we spent so much money. And this was like a really hard lesson to learn, because as I said, like, I was in it to be successful, right? And so if you're not doing well, if you're not successful, you're not getting joy from the things you should be, which is like building an amazing product, seeing customers' faces, caring about the results, delivering something into the world that gives you passion. And so when it's hard and it's not working, it's just even harder, because you don't really care about the problem you're solving. And so for 2 years, I battled it out. It was like the last man standing. We had to let go of basically the 100 people that worked for us in waves over 2 years. We had antagonistic investors calling, like vendors we couldn't pay. At one point, we had to, this is before like Amazon Web Services. So we were using a data center, and they were going to shut down our equipment, and we couldn't afford the bill. And so we had to go in and say like, oh, we're making a server change, take the equipment and put it in another data center. Like, it's a pretty hardcore thing to do. And so that one ended up failing. My parents had invested, friends had, I had invested, and ended up at 28, fully broke, nothing, and felt like the weight of failure. And for most, like, okay, kind of scary, but just for me, that was my identity when I was younger. I was so wrapped up in being successful, and I was watching all my friends like starting to grow in their career. And it just was like, how am I ever going to make this up? So it was a really tough first go. But the learnings from that, it was so interesting because at the time I was like, I have no skills. Like I did this random thing and I kind of like, I hired some people, I raised some money, I built some product. I'm not really an expert in any of these things, but it was so interesting because then as I started doing other things, I kept going back to the lessons I had learned, negotiating with vendors, building teams, raising money. And so even when you do something that fails, you actually grow so much. And the other like point for a listener is like, look, you failed. Okay, now immediately the day after, you have your next idea. And then you're excited about something else. And then you can go again and you can raise money, you can get a job. And so it's like the worst part of it was just for those 2 years, I was scared of failing. And I was almost like paralyzed, just like, we need to make it work. And then as soon as I was like, shit, I don't have to worry about this problem anymore. It's failed. Okay, fine. Like it felt shitty, but then it was like, well, what's next? And then I started getting excited about new things. So I think failure is often much more scary than it actually is. And if you're an entrepreneur, like you are likely to deal with this at some point, especially in your journey as you build your skill set. And so that's one lesson I would say is like, don't be afraid. And when you do fail, like, okay, fine, like what's next? Like get up and it gives you strength so that now when things are going badly, I just know there's another side to it, which is nice.
Yeah. It's an amazing story. And it's funny because like in the moment, I've been there too. You feel like you have no skills, but like those are the skills. Those are all the skills you need, right? Like you can take that playbook and apply it to almost anything as long as you can get out of your own way and convince yourself that you're not, nothing. So after that, is that when you started the second company or did you shift to working on Ethereum right then?
Yeah. So the second company I was in a pretty interesting place while I was doing this. I have ADHD and I'm just a very intense person as a result. So I love things with stimulation. So like I love extreme sports. I love intense challenges. I love working long hours. I'm just like a really intense guy. And I was kind of in the space of, as I mentioned, I'd had a drug problem since high school. Like I was functional, but I really was struggling, especially due to the stress of this company when it failed. And I just wanted to make a life change. And so one of the investors was like, hey, I've worked with you for 4 years. You're amazing. Why don't you move out to Israel? And with your hardware experience, we'll try to fund a hardware company together. And, the idea was like 3D printing, rapid prototyping, a bunch of changes to how hardware was made would make it cheaper to launch. And that Israeli talent, super phenomenal coming out of the army. You could start a hardware company much cheaper there than in Silicon Valley. And so I was like, wow, that sounds like a really interesting opportunity. So I went out there, mostly was interested in just like being away from the current lifestyle I had and like starting fresh. And so I went to Israel. I lived at like the border of Gaza, and it was my first experience of like, they ring alarms when missiles are fired. And just the intensity of living in a place where people are exposed to war all the time. Didn't feel specifically endangered, but it's a much different culture than Canada. I'm also not Jewish. I don't speak Hebrew. So, I'm in this place where I'm totally isolated and alone, just trying to figure it out, which is pretty cool as well. And then while I was there, I was going to come home for Christmas and I didn't want to pay for the flight. And so I'd always been a meditator since high school. I'd been interested, but not a super like deep practice. And so I'd been doing Headspace and somebody had mentioned, hey, there's this thing like Vipassana. Like, if you really want to take the next step on your meditation journey, you should try it. And so instead of flying home that Christmas, I just booked a Vipassana retreat that ended on New Year's, and it seemed super appropriate. So, and for those listening, a Vipassana retreat is a 10-day meditation retreat in silence each day. It's very disciplined. So you wake up at 4:30, you do about 10 hours of guided meditation per day, and then go to bed. And that was the first I'd really experienced meditation. And all these things I'm talking about with you now, being vulnerable, I'm super happy to do it because these feelings of like, I'm not good enough, people will love me if I'm successful. I need to make money. Like these are things I don't feel so much anymore. And that I did, and were driving all my decisions, even with drugs and stuff like that. And so Vipassana was the first time where I really started to dig into like, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What thoughts am I having that are generating these emotions. It was really, really powerful. And that's what sort of sparked this change into, Ethereum and then wellness.
Yeah. So let's talk about crypto a little bit, because it's a side interest of mine as well. And I know, you're the first person on the podcast that I've talked to that has like deep on the ground experience with it. And then we'll shift to the wellness, because wellness is also my like number one area of interest. So it's like a perfect intersection.
Cool, man.
Yeah. So we can jam forever. But so with the crypto stuff, so I'd love to get like broadly first your assessment of like where you think we are in the broader cycle. There's obviously been so much hype of late, like in the last 3 to 6 months, of all these NFT, all these projects, but you were there way, way, way before that. And so like to your trained eye and to a lot of untrained eyes that are just coming into it today, what are some of the like most exciting use cases in your mind that just we haven't even scratched the surface yet of, that can inspire people to, maybe if they haven't dove down the rabbit hole, they can start looking into it?
So I think what's inspiring to me is just the pace of change in an open network. And you don't generally see this with corporations. And so what I mean by that is, like, when I started at Ethereum and in the Ethereum ecosystem in 2017, like, building something was extremely complicated. So 10-person team, there was a project called Augur, like getting it up. It's a prediction market. So it's the ability for somebody to post a market and then for others to bet on the market and the market to resolve. So you could post, as an individual market, will Donald Trump win the election? And people can then bet. And so it's like an autonomous betting platform.
Like
and the idea was
almost.
like a casino, but on like all kinds of crazy things. And then the idea was you could take that data to really understand markets, right? As a prediction. So what is likely to happen? And when people are voting with their money, there's some evidence that the results are better than when not. And so that project took years to build, to audit, to do security audits, to launch it. Like, none of the tooling was there to actually do it. And, you fast forward 3-4 years later, I'd be going to these amazing hackathons called ETH Global, like, just incredible experience. If you're a developer and you're listening, join an ETH Global hackathon to really understand like what can be built. And in 3 days, because of the new tooling, the developer tools, the patterns, improvements in testing, improvements in auditing practices, like what used to take years has been shortened to months. And so you're just seeing an explosion in innovation. And then the other interesting thing about crypto is everything interacts with each other. So one example of that is like, there's a smart contract protocol called Compound, and it allows you to lock up your Ether or other assets and get interest on it, right? And so this was built by like 4 developers, and I think it's securing, more than $1 billion at the moment. It might even be significantly more than that. To build that in the traditional financial system, like a money market, the amount of lawyers, back office, processing to build that is an order of magnitude cost. Like, to build Compound, $2 million, 4 or 5 engineers and a few months of time. And even 1 year, 2 years from now, that it'll be a fraction of that. So I think what's really exciting about crypto is because things are open and can be built on top of each other. Like, now it's not like, hey, Compound is this walled garden. Anyone can use it, right? Which is super exciting. And so the fact that the systems are open, the developer tools have gotten much better, that is like extremely powerful. It's like really a global open financial system, and it's grown like so much faster than even I expected. So I'll stop there. We can kind of go whatever way you want with it. And we can talk about other applications also.
Yeah. So when you joined not joined, I don't know if it was like a centralized body or you were working remote, like decentralized, just on the effort in 2017, what were you specifically focused on? Like, were you almost like a gun for hire on these different projects, or were you working on the core Ethereum platform? Like, how did that work for you?
Yeah, so the way I got involved was like pretty much just by luck, and like was in the right place at the right time. I'm not, I love the principles, but I'm not like a diehard. There's people who are, have been in since 2010. Like, I don't believe in the government, and like very like intensely bought in. To me, it was more just really interesting technical problem, and also just very interesting. The community around it is what really got me. Like the people involved are just so amazing and kind and quirky. And so, we lived in a house in Berlin with our entire team. We lived in a house in San Francisco. We would go to all these weird events. At one point, we were competing for this bounty, an anonymous bounty, to then we were going to use the money to build a real life art project. So just like weird stuff goes on that's like so awesome and cool and different. And so for me, after that Vipassana we had mentioned, I learned about psychedelic medicines there and had been thinking about psychedelics for a while, been reading up on it. And I went maybe about a year later, 8 months later, to Peru with one of my best friends from university. And we did a bunch of ayahuasca together, and have actually been sober since then, which we could talk about if you want. But he is actually turned out to be one of the founders of Polychain Capital, which is now one of the largest VC/hedge funds in crypto. And he said, hey, I know you've been doing really complex hardware projects, engineering management. Why don't you come and help our portfolio companies? A lot of them are first-time founders or professors. Can you help them hire engineering teams and determine what to build? And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So I kind of started doing that on the side, got super into it just based on the caliber of people I mentioned. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. Why are these people so interested? Like, this is so cool. Moved to San Francisco, was just living on like couches for a while, and then started doing a bunch of projects with the Ethereum Foundation because I thought it was cool. So the first one was called ETH Prize. And so we interviewed 100 developers that were like prominent in the space about what they needed to see to make Ethereum better, and what they needed to make the developer environment better. And then it was kind of like the X Prize, and that we raised a bunch of money to fund the improvements. And so we made all the interviews public on a website. Anyone could read them. And then Ethereum Foundation was kind of like, why is this guy doing this? Like, I just thought it was cool. Like I got to meet, if you're listening, you're going into a new space. The best thing to do is not think about money, but think about access. And so what are projects you can do that are going to give you visibility? Is there like interviews you can do, content writing, some type of project that like maps the space? Is there something that you can do to help? And so the ETH Prize was great because it helped build a community of like the best developers in the space. It helped raise money to solve problems. And so I kind of started with that. And after that, the Ethereum Foundation was like, whoa, this is really cool. Why don't you come work with us? And so I had done a bunch of like really cool stuff. I built a community of security auditors. I worked on grants. I worked on what was called like ecosystem development. I worked on developer experience. So it was like, how do we get more people building on this platform? How do we bring more partners? How do we get awareness out? And it all just kind of snowballed organically from talking and networking and like being friendly and like being interested and like working on kind of side projects. I think that's a fantastic, don't be afraid to go into a new space. Like I'm not super technical either. And I think there was a huge advantage in 2017 because people were, there wasn't even any applications at the time. And the discussions are about, Web3 and bytecode and Solidity. And people are like, what is all this, consensus mechanisms? And I had to sit through a lot of discomfort. It kind of goes back to what you learn in the Dark Retreat. It was like, okay, I'm maybe the dumbest guy in the room here. I don't know what anyone's talking about. Like, am I going to sound stupid if I ask a naive question? And sitting through the discomfort, you're learning from the fire hose and realizing like, yeah, you can learn anything. So if you're excited about a space, like go to the conferences, reach out to the early stage companies, ask them about what they're doing, like spend the time. And I think it always, again, like really pays off.
Yeah. It's a cliche, but I always feel like the best rooms to be in are the ones where you're the dumbest one in the room, right? Because the level of learning is just so magnified with just like brilliant people all around you. So it sounds like you got a lot of that early on, which is awesome.
Yeah. And it's tough because you're just wondering like, hey, I'm not a developer. Like is this going to be a dumb thing to ask? But it's not. People usually just love to help. And if you're passionate, I think, people want to be helpful, especially in these new spaces where there are a lot of believers in the cause.
Yeah. So I want to shift down the wellness route, but I think the ayahuasca journey you had and the experience, which really, it seems like kicked off this like whole second, wave of your life, I think it'll be interesting to talk about because, some people know what ayahuasca is, some people don't. But the people that do know what it is, it's very rare that they get the opportunity to hear like transparently, authentically about the experience from someone, and you're someone that will cross over with this audience and can kind of be a voice around that. So I'd love for you to just talk about like what that experience was like. And I know it helps cure the addiction, but what else coming out of it? Like, were you just shot out of a cannon coming out of it, focused, refocusing, or just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and this is again something like maybe we have to do another episode to go deeper. There's so much around psychedelics in general, and I'm such an advocate that recently I've joined a psychedelic venture fund called Vine Ventures as an advisor and a director. Just because I'm so passionate about the changes it helped in my life. I've also, though, seen a lot of my friends like, hey, man, these results are amazing. Go on retreat and come back. And for sure, 100%, you're likely to have, I won't say for everyone, but very likely, and people are different depending on their mental state. But if you're mentally healthy, you're very likely to have this period of 30 days to 3 months of just ability to implement intense change and new habits, and where you feel like on fire. However, after that 1 month to 3 month period, if you didn't take advantage of the time to change habit, with things like a daily mindfulness practice, relationships, removing negative habits, it becomes, you're almost back where you started in some ways. And so what really was profound for me is the ayahuasca was great. It gave me that window to make change. And so when I came back, I wasn't even thinking about alcohol. I had a very strong intention. I wasn't thinking about drugs. I was like, okay, I'm going to be sober and I'm going to get my life in gear here. And I felt super pumped about it. But I met my fiance right after that, who's extremely healthy. She's a registered dietitian. She's brilliant. And she got me into, a lot of the stuff I'm doing today. So Wim Hof, cold exposure, hot, cold, saunas. And it was combining her support, the ayahuasca experience itself, and then the social aspects of, the hot, cold as something to do in the evenings. And then a daily mindfulness practice that really led to the entire change. So I would say that psychedelic medicine's extremely powerful, but used on their own, you'll have this window to make change. However, if that's the only tool in your arsenal, it's unlikely you'll maximize the results. I still have an extremely beautiful experience. And what I mean by beautiful, so, something that stands out from that first experience, it was 4 ayahuasca journeys in the jungle, taking a tiny boat into an area with huts on stilts over the river, which is wild and quite scary also, and very intense. But the feeling, there's a part of your mind that's just thinking all the time. The neocortex / default mode network, you may have heard of this term, and it's the part of our brain that takes in all the inputs and generates stories for safety. So our brain is like a computer in that way. You're not every time looking oh, that's a light, that's a tree. Your brain knows, and it takes in these inputs and generates stories, and these stories become our identity. And so our identity is, I run a podcast, or I'm a male. This is my favorite sports team. I'm funny. I'm brave. These are things we make up. They're constructs. It's very hard to see that the way we live our life. And what psychedelic medicines do, that part of the brain shuts down. And as a result, new connections start happening. And so this idea, this identity that you hold so firmly to, and the default mode network develops and sort of solidifies, becomes harder to change later in life. So you're 30, your patterns are pretty established. And so you're in this pathway, okay, I get up, I want to work because it's important, I'm successful, right? That's a construct. And so psychedelics just help, all that stuff fades away. And you're whoa, this isn't me, And then you may even feel so connected because you don't feel this I. So it's, you just feel connected to others. So I was feeling in the room wow, we're all the same. It doesn't matter. And it's easy to say that. And yeah, I get it. People are equal. But to actually feel it creates change, right? It creates this mystical experience people have that then provides support for behavior change later.
Yeah. It's this idea, and I haven't gone through a journey that that deep. I've experimented here and there, but it's like that ego death idea where it basically gives you, like what you're saying at the beginning, it gives you space to think differently. And I mean, the way you're describing it, like it's crazy to me that everybody is not, in line / mandated to go through these types of experiences once in a while, right? Just as like a reset to try to reconnect with like what is actually going on out there. Like it seems wild,
So this is what led me to create our newest business, and just the combination of the meditation and the hot cold and the psychedelic medicines for me, it was like for the first time in my life, I felt super happy. It's just kind of coincidental, became pretty successful at Ethereum, and that was fantastic. But I felt like every day, like, wow, I fucking feel good. I feel good about myself. Like, I'm doing the right thing. I have this amazing partner. I just felt so full. And so I wanted to teach people about these things. I'm like, man, psychedelic medicine, like read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. And the responses were very difficult. Like meditation has so much friction to learn. So, I have a friend, super high performer. People would probably know him if I mentioned his name on here. Amazing entrepreneur. Meditated 300 times last year, which is already like, he's so disciplined. And he came to me and was like, I don't know if I'm getting anything out of this. I think I might quit. And it's like, wow, if you're putting in that much effort and you're like the most disciplined person I know, and you're about to quit, like, okay, that's tough. Like, how is the normal person going to access these things? And, only 86% of people, or only 14% of people have a mindfulness practice after all the stuff you've heard about meditation, yoga. It's just very hard, and the feedback cycle is long. So I looked at that, and then the psychedelic medicines, you're like, wow, everyone needs to try this. And it depends on your mental state. There's some dangers associated and like, where you're doing it, but it's illegal. And I'm like telling my mom about it. And she's like, yeah, I read Michael Pollan's book, but like, you're kind of just doing drugs. I was like, okay. Yeah, okay. And so I'm just, really trying to get people into these things, and it's rapidly changing. So MDMA is likely to be legal for therapy in 2023. I think it will for PTSD. I think shortly after will be available for couples, and that will kind of open the doorway because it's less scary. It's a very beautiful experience. You feel super connected to your heart. If you struggle with self-love, and like you're always your own critic, it can immediately open you up, help you feel connected to others, less worried about what people think about you, which is a struggle for me for many years. So I think we're on the way to what you said is, it's just very common for people as part of their life to have one guided experience. It's very common for a couple to do this once a year. And hopefully in 10 years from now, that's where we're at. But I kind of looked at that and was like, okay, I know I have these tools, but I can't get people into them. So what can we do? And that's what sort of started sparking some of these new interests.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get into it. So, let's start with the kind of the science around breathwork. So for me, anecdotally, I read James Nestor's book, and I did like Wim Hof plus meditation for 45 days in a row, and I've never felt better, right? Sadly, I got a puppy and lost the discipline when I was waking up at 6 a.m. And I hate myself every day for that because I really want to get back into it. But, for people who don't understand what's happening when you're doing breath work, or like they've heard of Wim Hof, but they haven't tried it. Can you just first go in before we get into the company to like the science behind breath work and actually what's happening that's creating, the beneficial aspects of doing it?
100%. So I'll give a short intro and you can double click on whatever you want to go into more depth. And so it's kind of like, hey, well, what's happening with breath work? It's like, well, what's happening with exercise? And, within exercise, there's like cardio and strength and mobility. And so just like that in breath work, there's many different modalities and many different reasons you might do it. And these are ancient practices, like thousands of years old, like pranayama and yoga is, beginning of time kind of thing. And so one thing to remember for people listening, one, like first, we can just tune into our breath. So like we'll do a nice big inhale in 3, 2, 1 through the nose, into the belly, and then a nice slow exhale. And you can feel one single breath can change your state, one single breath, right? And so the breath is your ability to control your automatic nervous system. And so through breath, you can control your stress response, your heart rate, your circulation, the hormones released in your body, your immune system. And so there's basically two styles of breathing. One is pushing the gas pedal on the nervous system, which is what the Wim Hof is doing, is creating an adrenal effect, pushing you into what's called the fight or flight state. The other is pushing the brake on the nervous system, moving you into the rest and digest state. That's any breathing where you're extending the exhale, breathing deep into the diaphragm. So you've heard of like diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, slowing the exhale, box breathing. These are all examples of slowing the nervous system state to move you into rest and digest, sends blood flow to the organs, signifies you're safe, prepares you for sleep. That's the state of being you want to be in all the time. Notifications, like for you, even, a 3-minute breath work a couple times a day, fantastic, right? Like what's happened now, and this is why I went to the dark retreat, even knowing about these practices, but every time you're checking Slack, you're checking your phone, your brain doesn't know that's not real stress. It perceives these items as like stress, stimulation. What happens? Boom, fight or flight effect. Your body, you start breathing through your chest. You're breathing faster, which is fine for short periods of time. And like 20 years ago, we had far less stimulation. So we would live and breathe normally in the rest and digest system, which is where we're meant. Now, chronic diseases are being caused, like 8 out of 10 cancers, not enough blood flow to the organs. And it's a result of too much fight or flight, too much cortisol, too much overstimulation, just mostly from using the phone and then also from processed foods. So you read James Nestor's book. When you're eating, a Big Mac, an acidic forming food, it's going to cause you to breathe out more carbon dioxide, breathe out from the chest, breathe through the mouth, which is whole another problem around foundational breathing. So I would think of breathwork, the science, if I'm either turning down the system or turning up the system. Now, when I'm turning up the system, you'd say, well, why would I do that if I'm always in fight or flight? And this is the Wim Hof method. And so what's happening there, you're breathing out so much carbon dioxide through hyperventilation that the blood vessels start to constrict. And there's something called the Bohr effect. So imagine oxygen, a little like tiny ball coming into your lungs. It's being picked up in a truck, which is the red blood cell, and it's being delivered to, the heart, the brain, the tissues, and everything's all good. Now we start breathing too much CO2. We don't have enough carbon dioxide in our body. Imagine carbon dioxide is the lube that's allowing you to open the door in that truck, the oxygen to open the door in that truck and like get out where it's supposed to be delivered. And so what's happening when there's not enough carbon dioxide, oxygen's picked up, it's in the blood, it's coming to the heart. The oxygen, this little ball can't open the door, it can't get out, it can't get to the heart, the brain. And so the whole thing about James Nestor's book is like checking your CO2 tolerance, having enough CO2. It's like not mouth breathing at night, not mouth breathing when eating poor foods. So there's a bunch of techniques around that. And there's a simple score called a Bolt score that you can use to determine, it's not like perfect, but you can use it to determine your CO2 tolerance, how much CO2 you have in the body, how well you're processing oxygen. So now the Wim Hof style of breathing, you're actually doing this purposefully. You're getting rid of carbon dioxide. Your blood vessels are constricting, and you have trouble bringing oxygen to the brain. And that default mode network we had mentioned before, guess what? The same thing that's happening with psychedelics is happening in a deep state of meditation. It's also happening with breath work. This ego, and you felt this when you feel those tingles and this shutdown and you feel space, that part of your brain is shutting down, which gives you the ability to process stored emotions. So that style, this Wim Hof style of breath work, it's creating an adrenal effect. It's sending blood flow to the brain initially. It's creating hormonal changes that are like, hey, be alert and aware. So people love it in the morning, kind of 10 minutes, 12 minutes. When you hit about 20 minutes of that Wim Hof style, you're actually shutting down prefrontal cortex and bringing up emotions. And so that style of breath work is phenomenal for breakup, grief, loneliness. When you're facing these difficult challenges and you want some space to be able to process them. And I've seen like insane breakthroughs, like woman couldn't leave her house for the first 6 months of COVID, legitimately 10 breathwork sessions. Like she couldn't even go to the door to accept food from a delivery man because of the fear. Within 10 breathwork sessions, she messaged us, was out with a mask, like going around, like completely changed her life. So I think there's breathwork for relaxation, right? Improving sleep. There's breathwork for like ramping up your nervous system state for energy. There's breathwork for like full-blown emotional release. And then there's foundational breathing, which you should just be doing all the time to optimize the oxygen uptake of the body. So that's kind of an overview. Happy to go into any of those items if you'd like.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I think what's, why I'm so pumped about breathwork is for someone who hasn't gone down the psychedelic path, who hasn't tried some of these more out there methodologies, you can empathize and like understand why, right? It's a lot to bite off to try something that someone hasn't even thought about, like, grappling with. But everybody breathes. Every single person breathes 25,000 times a day, I heard you say on a different podcast. So like, this is a great entry point. If you can get some of the benefit, even if it's only 10% change, it's so worth trying because you're going to breathe anyway. And I think that's one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, that's probably why this is so attractive, right? Your addressable market is everyone, kind of, because everybody breathes and everybody needs to enter this kind of thought process one way or another.
100%. And I think what's super exciting about this is I spent 4 years trying to teach people meditation and psychedelic medicines and not really succeeding. And I think this is like one of the mechanisms that's helping. And so some of the things we did to make it even more fun, and look, I'm not saying, hey, this is going to take you to the deepest state on the planet. I'm saying like, we're creating something that's super fun and engaging. It's going to make you feel amazing and it's going to help. And it's like an entry point. Like you're meeting people where you're at. Like the bottom line is 86% of people don't have a mindfulness practice. And for those people, like meditation, for a lot of my friends, it hasn't worked. So how do you get people to a state where they respect and enjoy the present moment? And our idea was like, well, can we make it fun? So we've partnered with DJs that did sets at Burning Man. It's like amazing tribal house music where you're like, whoa, this is a cool set. Like I would listen to this anyways. We've done some like jazz tracks where you play while you're cooking and it's a breathing track over the jazz. So like you're cooking, you're going to listen to music anyways. Why not breathe in the perfect pattern? And so what we've tried to do is take the excitement, the emotional connection of a fitness class, whatever that feeling you get when you work out, and let's make that into a mindfulness practice. So meditation doesn't always have to be, silence or waterfalls or wind chimes, or about spirituality, which a lot of people don't resonate with. What about just using science-backed practices that are super fun and engaging and great music? And we've just seen an awesome response by making these things like really fun.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about the company, because right now you're kind of running it with a 3-pronged approach, right? So and I'd love for you to talk about the initial way you framed it. And then of course, because of COVID, I think that's probably why you've pressed the accelerator on the digital side, but you've got the physical spaces in the bathhouse, which I'd love for you to expand upon. You've got the digital product, which is the platform you're building, and then you've got the community. So maybe talk us through how those all come together and what the strategy has been since you started.
Totally. And all this stuff came from like legit an ice bath in my backyard. And there's just a ton of entrepreneurial lessons here that are almost the exact opposite of what I did, the first time around, building everything and like build they will come, and like really being cognizant of spend and like making your ideas go as far as possible. And so, it's such a great, like, I'm just so passionate about what we're building now. And the vision is really like, it's grown beyond. It's just a space where we can be healthy together and like healthier and happier in community, authentically connecting to help deal with life's modern stress, right? And it's all these different journeys you're taking, your health journey, your community journey, your inward journey, to really help you grow, but in a way that's like fun and cool. And so that wasn't the mission when we started. We started because, there was no cold water in my house. And so me and a couple friends built an ice bath and put it in my backyard. And even the first ice bath, we were going to buy one and it was expensive. And so we messaged the owners of the company, Morozco Forge, super cool company for ice baths, check it out. And I was like, listen, if you guys come up here, maybe we can build it together to save on costs. And if you've never been to Canada, I'll pay for your flight. And my partners were like, these guys are going to tell you to take a hike. Like no one's going to come up here and build up their product with you. And they saw it and were super cool. We're like, we've never been to Canada. We would love to. So they literally sent me their design plans. We ordered all the parts and we spent like a couple days building this, automated ice bath by hand in my backyard. And then I'm still working for Ethereum at this point. And so every night, me, my partners that just loved cold plunges, we start inviting people over, so we'd go to local gyms, health restaurants, just our friends, and have people buy and just like, yo, you want to come experience an ice bath? And at first it was just an ice bath. Then it became, an ice bath with like essential oils and sound bowls. Then it became a guided meditation as we noticed that, it's not really about the health benefits. It's about the mental state. And then, all of a sudden we have about 150 person WhatsApp group and people are just showing up at my house. And I'm having coffee. I'm looking out in the backyard. There's like 4 people just taking an ice bath. I'm like, well, this is cool. And so it starts getting cold and we're like, well, what are we going to do? And so we looked at my garage and like the next step, okay, well, maybe we don't need a full space. We can do something small to test. And so, we put in a sauna, ice bath. We do a little landing page and it was just going to be an event space. And my sister came in one day. It was like, yo, like, implementing a booking system is pretty easy. So we got insurance, put up a billing platform, and all of a sudden people are coming. Right. And we're like, within 2 months, just through word of mouth, we're doing 30 people a day. And so it's still like a side project. And we're just like, well, this is cool. And that's when things started to really change of like, wow, this is powerful. Like people would come in the sauna together and then go on like a ski trip, meeting one time. And you're like, what is happening here? And so then we started doing amazing programming. So not just like sauna and ice bath, but, 6 people in a sauna in the complete darkness sharing their fears. And then like vocal toning together, a couple eye gazing, doing a couples plunge, connecting their heart rates in the ice bath, going in the ice bath until you're shivering, laying on the ground, doing a trauma release exercise to like kind of getting to these same states of meditation and psychedelic medicines, but in a way that's like way less frightening and way more approachable and accessible. And so how we were selling it was like, come to this cool space that's kind of like the coolest bar you're going to go to in terms of the design, the music, the smells. I do these things that like make you feel alive and amazing, right? Like after you do this thing you're afraid of, you have this adrenal effect in the ice bath, you feel amazing. You want to share. You're like, yeah, man, like let's listen, this is who I am. It's so cool doing that with you. Exactly. And then you go in the sauna, no one's on their phone, you start sharing. And then even further, the instructor is guiding you to emotional experiences, to these heart-opening experiences. Like I would see people, strangers, like fully sharing like what they're afraid of, what they want to accomplish, and then be like, wow, this is such a good way to socialize. I don't even share this with like my closest friends because you're not prompted and you don't feel these same feelings of aliveness and elation doing other things. And so then we got the idea was, well, why can't we build, the social space of the future for like, if you're into, for entrepreneurs listening, like, do you necessarily want to go out and have 6 beers to hang out now? Like you want to perform, right? You want to feel good. You want to connect. And so we were thinking like for people into meditation, into psychedelic medicines, into biohacking, into entrepreneurship, into performance, where do those people hang out? All of those things are new, but the social settings that support them have not developed. So they're literally in Toronto, at least it wasn't a single place where you could hang out in that environment. You could like grow together, learn together, and have it be fun. And so had to shut that down during COVID. And some of the breathwork sessions we were doing as part of these classes, we just started doing online. And so another example of like, okay, MVP, right? What's the MVP? Well, it's a free Zoom link every Sunday and no production, a microphone, just guiding some people. And like legit during COVID, hundreds of people started coming, we started doing it every week for a summer just for free. People started donating. They were asking for recordings. They were saying like, oh, can I get a breathwork for sleep? Can I get one for waking up? And at that point, I'd also read James Nestor's book. I'd read pretty much every research paper on breathwork. I'd taken the Wim Hof training. We did the XPT course and just found out there's a ton here. It's not just for these heart-opening things. As I mentioned before, it's for sleep, it's for anxiety, it's for your foundational patterns, which everyone's struggling with and just seemed like a huge problem. And then the product kind of got pulled out of us. So we started with an awesome course site and just put up a few videos. We filmed them internally, scripted the sessions, bought the camera, edited everything, and like legit probably super, super cheap. I think we'd spent less than $5,000 on the first version, just us making it, and put it out there, watched what happened, interviewed customers, had them look at the landing page. What does it mean? Every time someone used it 3 times, we'd interview them, ask them to refer a friend, kept doing the lives, having every 2 weeks a session for all our customers to ask for feature requests. And over time, we built what I think is now the largest breathwork library in the world with a few hundred sessions across like any topic you can imagine, with beautiful videos. And now we're looking to move towards a mobile app. And so that kind of came at the same time while we were closed. And this whole journey to build this physical space, it's been about 2 years now. We just signed a lease a couple months ago. We're starting to build flagship location in Toronto, 40-person sauna, like nightclub sound system, light shows. Like, just imagine you're in there, like in this place that feels like a Soho house. There's a fire pit inside where you talk around, because humans have talked around a fire since the beginning of time. There's 4 ice baths, and you're coming in for like a class, a show, entertainment. You're socializing, and you leave just feeling amazing, connected, healthy. The designs, like the lights are all like a low red, so you feel like super safe. It's like we just got we're working with amazing interior designer. We just got our first set of renderings, like seeing the vision come to life. So excited. And so now with both these products starting to work, our vision is physical space that you go to weekly, right? With your friends, your community. You go there to learn, to meet others that are part of this tribe that wants to grow in a way that's fun. You have your digital app at home, which is your daily breathwork practice, which is again, fun, mindful, helping you feel better. And then there's a digital community in Slack where there's courses. And so, in Slack, you might come to a new city. You're like, I want to find my inward tribe. And you pop in the Slack for that city. You find a bunch of people. Oh, these people are interested in breathwork and fasting and meditation and psychedelics. Wicked. And then you have a space to go around that. And so we really want to be this new, almost other world where you go on your journey together with other people to make you feel better, So that's the vision now, and kind of how we got here.
I'm fired up, man. That sounds amazing. It's so cool. I love when people like remix things that you wouldn't have traditionally thought go together. So like you're taking the like DJ type music environment mixed with the, sauna, ice plunge, wellness piece. You cross that up. People haven't seen that before. And like you're saying, it's just the right combination of inputs that people are really resonating with. So I'm stoked to see what happens when you guys get that location done and open and people are in there. It sounds great.
Yeah, goal's October 1st. So if you want to come down, we can chat offline. But yeah, I would love to host you after we open and take you through some of these experiences.
That would be amazing. All right, so I want to be conscious of time. We typically shoot for around the hour mark, but I feel like me and you could riff forever. I've got a couple of quick hitters for you, and then we'll shift into the brainstorm, and then we'll wrap up. So one of the things that I had here that I would love to get your take on. So you've joined as a director in the Psychedelic Medicine Investment Fund, and so you're looking at different emerging companies and investment opportunities in that space. What are some of the exciting things, beyond just the foundational bringing psychedelics either through telemedicine or through clinics, which people would assume is like step one? What are some of the other exciting things you're seeing that are emerging in the space that the group's looking at to invest in?
Yeah, so this is a personal one. It's not so much a thesis of the group yet, but I really think these medicines, like obviously awareness is super important, and safety, right? And so like doing them in a legal way in a clinic environment is extremely important. Now, that's just the first part of the battle. Like, as you heard, I mentioned, if you just take the psychedelic on its own, I'm not sure of the effectiveness, at least from what I've seen, like qualitatively amongst my friends. I think for PTSD and depression, they've shown some pretty good effects with just the psychedelic alone and some psychotherapy sessions. But for the person who's listening, who's a founder, who feels generally mentally healthy, I think there's just way more to it that's required. And so it's, community, and you'll hear this term integration, but it's really like a daily mindfulness practice, some type of giving in your life, a strong community, health of your body. And so what I'm really excited about, I think there's like never ending opportunity, is imagine 5 years from now, 30 to 70 million people in North America are taking these medicines. What do they do to implement change, to help implement new habits? And so what kind of groups can be created? What kind of facilitation can be done? What kind of experiences can be created around these things to help? So I'm very interested in any types of tools that make meditation easier, more fun, more community-based to combine with the psychedelic medicines. And I think it hasn't even started. It's not even clear that this is a huge problem. And it's only because of, 6 years of use and then working with probably thousands of people who've tried these things and watching the results. And so I just, personally, there's one example, really cool company called Trip. It's the leading wellness VR app. And so it's like super cool. Check it out. 50,000 downloads, but they tried to design in VR an experience that creates awe in humans. And so while most VR startups were looking at like recreating beaches and forests, they were recreating environments that don't exist in the normal world to make you feel awe. So the feeling of you're floating, you're ascending, you're in these landscapes that are massively growing. And so I think I'm super excited that through VR, we'll be able to make meditation more engaging, more exciting for the average person. And combining that with psychedelic medicines will allow for like real behavioral change and breakthroughs.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a space that's not, like you said, not even in the first inning yet. And it's going to be amazing to see what happens as it matures. So one of the other things I saw in your background is that you went through the On Deck Founder Fellowship. And so, personally, that's something I've looked at doing. And I'd love for you to just talk about your experience. Like, what were you looking to get out of it when you went in it? And, how was it different than some of the other trainings or programs that you've tried?
So I think as a founder, the best way to learn is through people. And no matter what, when you listen to a podcast, you read an article, there's like a bias, someone's telling a story. And so the fastest way I found to learn personally is talking to an expert in the field who's just done this thing recently and can just give you like the raw, hey, this is how you do it. So we actually have a policy, we're opening the new space. Well, I talked to the owners of Solid Core, Legree Fitness, Felix in LA, which is like one of the best restaurants. She's a Toronto native, Ride Cycle Club, and it's like, hey, how do you do your manager cadences? How do you ensure cleanliness? How do you deal with customer support? How do you deal with your contractors? And like those 5 conversations, 1 hour each, I guarantee you I can get like 60 to 70% of the information required. And so what On Deck does, it seeds you with a platform of, 1,500 people that are experts in fields. And so whether it's, design, engineering, mobile apps, growth, you can find somebody on the platform who's an expert in what you're looking for. I joined because I'd never done any mobile development or consumer growth. And so we were very comfortable with physical spaces. I'm very comfortable in like a deep tech environment, but consumer growth for a mobile app was totally new. And so a friend had recommended I go, and I went to learn more about, analytics on your website, building a mobile app. How do you grow early? How do some of these ads channels work? How do you scale? And it was fantastic. Like I met in the first week, it was really intense. I think, and what you get out of it, it's something I found the best part about it was the people. And so the more people you meet, and not everybody's going to be relevant for what you're looking for. So the more people you meet, the more likely you are to have a beneficial experience, because it's just like anything, if you meet 100 people, there's probably 4, maybe 8 that are super relevant to what you're doing, where you're going to learn. And so you really just have to put in the time. But some of the people I met, I got connected with the CEO of Levels, who also went through On Deck, who was one of the best entrepreneurs, I've learned from. And he's, their whole team helped me get on podcasts. And so that was phenomenal. And they like shared with me how they did their SEO. They shared with me how they're doing growth. So that connection alone was easily worth the price. And then the network is just going to grow. And they have a flywheel of there's a founders program, an angel investing program, a podcasting program. a newsletter program. So it's just really cool way to meet good people at scale quickly. The other thing, because it's on Zoom, you network with people, you quickly meet them. So like they'll set up these icebreakers where you have a 5-minute chat. So I could literally in one day meet like 50 people. We're at a networking event that's kind of impossible. So if I went to another accelerator, they would be taking equity in my company. Maybe I would get to meet the people. Like, if there's a room and it's a bar, there's a bit of friction of like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, what, and this just sets it up to like meet a lot of people. And then they have a directory, which is great. So you can just type in podcasts and everyone with a podcast will come up and like you can reach out to them. So yeah, super huge fan of what they're doing and would highly recommend it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like it's really well done. Like they've stripped out a lot of the stuff you don't need in these types of programs and then double down on what you do need. It's funny, I just interviewed Anne from SolidCore, so she'll be the episode right before you, which is cool.
No way.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. She's a badass for sure. What they've built is crazy.
Yeah, she's one of the ultimate operators. Like she helped us with our lease and our leasing agreement, and like she pioneered a specialty like deal that was like unheard of in New York. She's just so on it. She actually just got engaged to one of my good friends, and so we're actually friends. So it's I really appreciate her help and love her vision.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, man. I think so the last question that we typically go into is kind of the brainstorm, and it feels like this is your life's work. So I'm not sure if you've given much thought to anything else, but the last question we ask is like, let's say you couldn't pursue inward and, you had to find another area to try to start a business in or another idea you had. What's one other thing that's, tough to be just as exciting, but exciting to you that you would look at?
So I like to follow passions, and why I like that now. Like I worked in crypto, which is like arguably the best opportunity to make money of like unquestionably of any time we'll be alive. Like it's a full scale new financial model. You can build these things with very small amount of people. There's network effects. They're global. Like it's amazing. And I left that space because after 4 years, when I was like hitting the pinnacle of my career, my connections, my network, I just felt more passionate about what I was doing now in terms of like really transforming lives end to end and seeing smiles and like helping people with addiction problems because of my own personal past. So I would say to people, when you're thinking about a new idea, what's really going to power you through is how much do you care about the customer? How much do you resonate with the customer? How much do you want to solve their problem? So first point is if you just want to make money, like crypto, there's enormous unending opportunities. And like, if that's your goal, message me and like go for it. But me now, I'm thinking of like, what is my passion? What do I want to do? And what problems do I want to solve? And so one that's like super inspiring to me is this, it's kind of two, and I'll try to be short about it, but loneliness in our research is like one of the number one untalked about epidemics. So there's a lot of research that loneliness can be as detrimental as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And that like 60% of the population in the US identifies as lonely, especially 60% of like heavy phone users. And so there's just like crazy stats that we're getting more and more lonely. Like I think there was a huge number, like 30% of people don't even have one person to share their problems with. Like it's crazy, right? So that to me is just driven by like urban cities, cell phone usage, work moving remote. There's a whole bunch of like environmental factors. And so I would love to see, absolutely love this and think, especially after the dark retreat where I was on a commune, I would love to see, especially for like, since people are getting married later, 20 to 35-year-olds, a space in nature, community living, hot, cold, beautiful co-working space, meditation, practice, growing your own food, and living like the community we're meant to. So at night, everybody works together, people meditate, everyone takes care of the space, and then you come together and cook like a giant 100-person dinner and you live with all these people. That to me is like the ultimate key to happiness. And I think that's the future of like what a WeWork actually will be, especially because people could work in like crypto, D2C. You don't need to be in cities. And I think there's enough people who want to be in healthy environments. So if I wasn't working on this, that would be like the number one thing I would want to live in. And that's a huge thing. And then the other is part of that also is regenerative farming. And so my good friend Justin Maris has an amazing newsletter about brands. He's building a new brand that's super cool, and you should have him on the podcast. But
yeah, he was on. He was episode 7. I work with his fiance actually, like my day job. So yes, I'm very close to Janine.
No way, man, that's so weird. That's just two random connections. But Justin's a good friend. He's like kind of a mentor. He's been helping me since day one of Inward Breathwork. He got me into regenerative farming, watching his newsletter, and I'm always thinking about climate. It's something I've started to get into as I've become more aware, and I'm just like so dismayed by all the stuff out. It's just like, seems like it's just a non-solvable problem, and it just seems like we're destroying the planet, and you become depressed. And I watched this video, 2 movies recently. One was called 2040 and another was called Kiss the Ground. And I read some stuff Justin had sent, and it just seems that regenerative farming is a huge solution, and using soil to sequester carbon is like a very legible solution. And so that would be something that, you know, kind of ties into like living outside, creating super healthy food for people to eat, and then helping the planet. I don't know if that's a good business. It seems that the farms are profitable. But if I was just following my passion, I think one of those 2 things would be the way it went.
Nice. I love it. All 3 are critical for humanity. So I'm sure there'll be businesses in all 3 soon enough. Thank you so much for sharing that. So before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you. Like I really enjoyed this conversation. I thought, you know, most of the episodes we have like this kind of set structure, but I just like letting it flow. And I feel like we jumped around to so many things. I think if people don't take anything else away, like your infectious energy and passion for what you're doing and the real authentic connection to the mission, which some founders can try to manufacture, but you can tell you have it like deep in your core. That's amazing. And so, you know, I just want to thank you again for coming on. I'm going to be a huge supporter, and you know, hopefully I'm in Toronto soon and can take you up on that offer and check out the space. Yeah, man, would love to host you. I'm even like tingling now, just getting excited about it. You know, you talk to someone, they're like, yeah, I believe in your mission. You're like, yeah, it's like, let's go. So like, I'm excited, man. Yeah. So I really had a fun time. I don't talk in detail about a lot of the stuff we covered. So it was just really cool to kind of go down memory lane, and you're an awesome interviewer. I really enjoyed myself. So thank you. Thank you, sir. Robbie Bent, co-founder and CEO of Inward. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks.